Hey there, I just wanted to take a second to say thank you so much for watching this episode of The Shepherd Station. If you feel this has added some value to your life, it would mean so much to us if you would share this episode with someone else. It helps us so much when you do that. It would go a long way in supporting our mission to help men become better fathers, husbands, and leaders. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and give us a like. If you're listening to us through Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen to podcasts, follow us, leave us a review, and let us know how we're doing. We want to hear from you. All right, that's all I've got. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Shepherd Station. We are at the Stockyard in Headland, 24 East Church Street. Come by and see us. Great coffee, good food, great place to hang out. With me today is Andy on this side, as always, and Thomas on this side. We got a really good show for you today. We have a special guest from, I believe he said is in Texas, right?
Texas today. He maintains various residences around the United States.
Coming to you from an undisclosed location in some kind of secret bunker.
Yeah.
Andy seems to get all these really, really good guests. He's got so many contacts, but, being the sheriff that he was, he made a lot of contacts, and he has been able to pull this gentleman in today, and Andy's got a lot of information about him. This is a really dynamic individual, so let's get started.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to have some of the contacts that I do, and just happened to get this fella yesterday on the spur of the moment. I sent him a text yesterday, and we had been talking about a topic that we were going to address today on the Shepherd Station, and I sent Kristofor a text, and I said, hey, we need to get you on sometime. Look at your dates on a Tuesday morning. He said, well, I can either do it tomorrow morning or I can do it on the 18th. And I said, well, let's go ahead and do it tomorrow then. But this morning with us on the Shepherd Station, we have Kristofor Healey. I met Kristofor probably a little over a year ago through a mutual friend of mine, Adam Davis. And we got hooked up and got to talking. And last year we had an event back in October in Birmingham, put on by Blue Watch. My friend Burke Swearingen up in Birmingham area put on an event where myself and Adam and Colonel Dave Grossman were speaking at. And Kristofor is going to be speaking at that same event coming up this October. But anyway, I'd gotten okay from Burke. Burke said, hey, he can come for free, if he can get here. So out of his own pocket, Kristofor last year, he paid for an airline ticket, flew over to Birmingham. We picked him up at the airport late. That about midnight that night, got him to the hotel. We sat down and talked for a while. Got up and had breakfast with Colonel Grossman the next morning, and then we went on to speak. And Kristofor just hung out there and did whatever. He sold books for Colonel Grossman and just did a variety of tasks there and everything. And but Kristofor's a great guy. It's Kristofor Healey, and Kristofor is a former federal agent. He did a little over 15 years with Homeland Security Investigations. He's an Ironman and an ultra marathon competitor. Although his wife's probably in better shape than he is and has more physical fitness knowledge than he does. That's kind of her game there. But Kristofor runs a very successful podcast and a newsletter called the Stoic Responder Podcast and newsletter. You can pick him up on Substack and Instagram and LinkedIn and a bunch of other social media platforms there. But Kristofor's also written 2 books. The first one was called Indispensable, A Tactical Plan for the Modern Man, and he has just released his second book titled In VALOR, which is 365 Stoic meditations for first responders. And I know, Kristofor, you pulled the rest of your hair out, right?
Just about, yeah.
I
didn't have much to pull out.
Yeah, while writing this second book here.
There is nothing wrong with being bald.
Yeah,
okay?
nothing
wrong with being bald.
Anything wrong with it. I just said it was a challenge. Was it not, Kristofor?
It was a heavy lift,
Yeah.
and to be fair, Adam warned me that it would be. You mentioned Adam Davis. He of course wrote Behind the Badge, which is another 365-day devotional, and for me, it had been weighing on me to write this, and I was inspired by what Adam had done, and decided that this was something I wanted to jump into. And despite his words of caution, letting me know this is going to take longer than you think, and it's going to be harder than you think, I dove in. So it was about 8 months worth of work, and kind of balancing. In that time, my daughter had 2 surgeries, and we had a lot going on, and you just find the time where you can, and you grind it out where you can. And I'm glad that it's come to market now, because I think it's going to help a lot of folks.
Yeah. Tell us, go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your law enforcement career, how you got into law enforcement, and the progression of your career as a federal agent, and kind of what you did. And then I want to talk about after you get to talking about that, I want to talk about a couple of unique prosecutions that you participated in.
Sure. So my background started with immigration and customs enforcement. A lot of people don't know this, and I'm not sure you even know this, Andy, but I was an archaeologist.
Right, you told me that.
You were an archaeologist.
Yeah.
I've never met
so that was
an
my
archaeologist.
background. I had an anthropology degree from the University of Maine. I was working in the field for one of my professors. I was taking a year off in between undergraduate and graduate school, and that summer was 2001. I had graduated college in 2001. Working for one of my professors. I was actually in the field on September 11th, and we were way down east, almost on the Canadian border. No cell towers down there at that time. Of course, the cell phone I had was one of those like Nextel, so you never got much reception with it anyway. But I didn't know that we had been attacked until late that evening when I got back to the hotel and was just turned on Sports Center to look for baseball highlights and saw the towers collapsing behind Stuart Scott. And I was like, well, what is happening here? And so. A couple days later, we got a visit from, or my professor, my boss, got a visit from the FBI office in Boston, and they were actually looking for volunteers to come down to Ground Zero who had the skill set that we had as archaeologists to sift through debris, looking for small pieces of evidence. Of course, we all signed up. We all said, yeah, we'll go. We never got the call. There were so many volunteers that we were far enough down on the list that, in hindsight, I'm grateful for that, given all the health issues that have come out of the folks who did get that call. But that really kind of set me on a path towards law enforcement. I said, this isn't, I love archaeology. I enjoyed it. It was something that I had wanted to do since I was a little kid. I grew up in the 80s as a Indiana Jones fan. So for me, it was something that I thought I wanted to do until 9/11. And 9/11 really set me on a different path. And it was just, for me, it was seeing those firemen and those police officers running into the towers that day really struck me. It really laid heavy on my heart. I decided to go in a different direction. So I had already gotten into graduate school. I went and continued my graduate education while I was applying for police jobs. DHS at the time wasn't a thing. They if you recall, those days after 9/11, they formed the Department of Homeland Security out of kind of the different little branches of the government that had a border focus or an immigration focus. They shoved them all together under DHS. And once DHS opened, they had a mass hiring. So there was kind of a hiring freeze in this period after 9/11. And I just shotgunned out applications to anyone that was a DHS entity. The reason being, the guys that attacked us that day were all in the country. They were immigrants in the sense that they were supposed to be non-immigrants. They had come on non-immigrant visas to attend school and things like that, but had stayed. So they were overstaying their visas. They were in the country illegally. And I thought, I want to be a part of whatever agency is going to round up those guys and stop this from happening again, stop this threat from inside. And so I applied for Customs and Border Protection. I applied for Border Patrol. I applied for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And I said, whoever offers me the job first, I'll take it. And I didn't care where it was. I didn't care what the duty station was. Just, I want the first billet that I get. And the call came in from HR, from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They offered me a job as an immigration enforcement agent down in Harlingen, Texas. I mentioned I grew up in Maine, so that was about 2,600 miles away.
Yeah,
I'd never heard of that town before. I said, "Where is it?" And the HR rep, from the San Antonio field office said, yeah, it's just a little bit south of Corpus Christi.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I've heard of Corpus Christi. That's a good-sized town. And by a little bit south, it turns out he meant 3 hours south and right on the border with Mexico. And so
three hours in Texas is just a little bit.
See, just a little bit.
Yeah.
That's a massive culture shock, wasn't it?
So, but I accepted the job. I went all the way down there, and I spent the next decade working. I started with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. After about 3 years, I got into, I'm sure we'll dig into all this, but after about 3 years, I started doing some work with the local internal affairs office. I was overseeing, at one point in my career, a contracted immigration detention facility, and I was running a team that would basically do inspections and make sure that they were maintaining the standards that I set. And so I was in an enforcement position, but I had this kind of collateral duty as a contract officer, go out and make sure that this contract is being run effectively. While I was doing that, I got intel from inside this prison from guys talking about things that were being brought in, dope and, contraband, other things that were being brought in. And I started developing sources, and I brought those sources to the local internal affairs office and said, hey, listen, there's a bunch of guards bringing stuff into this prison. If you guys want to make some cases, I've got sources. And those guys ended up recruiting me to work with them full time as a special agent. And so I ended up spending the remainder of my career with the Office of Inspector General within the Department of Homeland Security, which is our version of internal affairs, and had a lot of unique experiences on the border, and then moved off the border and worked on large scale fraud cases and scam cases and things of that nature. And eventually ended my career in the Houston area and went to work with my very talented wife a couple of years ago.
Speaking of your very talented wife, you meeting her was a direct result of being transferred to the border from Maine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my wife grew up in a small farming community about 45 minutes north of the border. Her dad was in the cotton industry for 30 years. All her uncles were farmers. They were all dryland cotton farmers there in deep South Texas. And so I met her down there, and would have never met her. We grew up in opposite corners of the country. Would have never met had I not accepted that job down there. So yeah, fate plays a role, I suppose.
Yeah.
How was the adjustment from where you were from to Texas? How'd you adjust to that culture shock?
You said it, culture shock. I grew up in a place I'd never heard. I have one friend who his dad was from Mexico. His dad was a doctor from Mexico. And so he spoke some Spanish. So I had heard some Spanish in my life, but mostly growing up in southern coastal Maine. If you hear a language other than English, it's French, because of all the French Canadians who come down from Quebec in the summertime to hang out on the beaches in Maine. So completely fish out of water culturally. Did not have any idea. I mean, you could have set me down on the moon and I would have been,
just out of place, right?
So it was quite the culture shock. And fortunately that I met my wife about 2 months after I got there, and I was looking for the exit. I said, I've got this federal career that I wanted, but I feel so out of place culturally. The culture is different. The food is different. The environment is different. So much hotter than where I grew up. So much more humid than where I grew up. Just the topography, everything was completely different. And had I not met her and had that kind of introduction to the community, the farming community, to get that into the community, because I was such an outsider in such a small town where everyone knew each other, that if I hadn't have gotten that into the community, I don't know that I would have lasted there.
Right.
Well, that's definitely God moving in your life, because there's not many things that will keep a guy somewhere better than a woman.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. You had one, and we've got so many things to talk about. We could probably go 2 or 3 hours with you, because you got so many different avenues that we could discuss. But you had a unique encounter with one of your supervisors, correct? A SAC that you worked for.
Very unique, yeah. So for those who are unfamiliar with that term, it means special agent in charge. And the FBI calls it an SAIC, but we call them in Homeland Security as typically the acronym is SAC. And I got hired on with the Inspector General's office. It was a very small office. We had only like 8 agents in that office, and nationwide maybe 200 guys doing the job that I was doing. So it was very small for the Department of Homeland Security. But our job was to oversee all of the allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse within the Department of Homeland Security. Now, in the Rio Grande Valley, as you can imagine, right there on the U.S.-Mexico border, where you have the Gulf Cartel operating in Matamoros and Tamaulipas, just south of the border, you've got a lot of corruption, tons of public corruption. And so our office was very, very busy, and we were overwhelmed, and our boss was very new. The special agent in charge of that office was a guy named Gene Pedraza. And when I got hired on, he had been on the job maybe 18 months. And it was one of those positions where it was almost like nobody else wanted the job. And so he kind of got it by default, but he probably wasn't the best candidate for it because he didn't have the experience, he didn't have the temperament. And immediately once he got that job, he started getting very concerned and nervous that other offices that had a internal affairs purview, like the FBI or the Office of Professional Responsibility, which is the internal affairs for Customs, for instance. He got worried that they were encroaching on our investigations and that they were going to make him look bad if they made cases. So because we got the first bite at the apple of any allegation of fraud that came in or employee corruption that came in through DHS, he was opening up every case that came in, no matter how little meat was on the bone. And all of a sudden, the 8 guys in this office, we had caseloads of 20 or 30 cases. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, a good special agent on working a federal investigation can maybe manage a docket of 5 or 6 cases at any given time, because these are typically large, sprawling, long-term fraud cases, public corruption cases. So when you're talking having 5, 6 times that many cases on your docket, nothing is moving, nothing is getting done. All that to say, about a year into this, my boss got word from our headquarters that our annual inspection was coming up. And typically the way it works in the federal government is you have internal inspections. The headquarters sends a unit down. They make sure you're, counting all your ammo and you're doing everything in accordance with the guidebook and all that stuff, right? He gets notification this is happening. He realizes what a mess he's got. He's got guys that aren't moving cases forward because they're overwhelmed with the amount of cases they have. We have terrible morale issues in the office because on top of these cases not moving, he's kind of a tyrant. He's denying people's leave requests. He's calling people in on weekends to do things that don't need to be done on weekends. He's really created this terrible environment where his incompetence is going to blow up in his face when this inspection team gets there. And he decides that his best course of action here is to make it look like work is being done, even though it's not. And so he gets a couple of kind of the office sycophants, the guys who see a promotion opportunity down the road when the ASAC, the assistant SAC, is fixing to retire. He gets a couple of those guys in. And he says, essentially, creates a criminal conspiracy. Essentially says, hey, listen, this is going to be a mess. I don't want to get my wrist slapped. I want you guys to create memos for all these files that the inspectors are going to look at that makes it look like investigative activity has happened that hasn't. And pure dumb luck on my part, I happen to walk in to the break room, which is next to the conference room, to get a cup of coffee. And as I walk in, I overhear what's happening in the conference room, which is these guys discussing this conspiracy. And it just so happened to be that the guy who was the new agent in the office, I was kind of his FTO, not officially, but I was kind of, showing him the ropes. He had gotten pulled into this. And so as I'm getting my cup of coffee, I'm kind of listening. And I go back to my office and he comes walking in a few minutes later and he's like, we got to go for a ride. I got to tell you what's going on here. And he confirms what I had heard. And at that point, I said, we got to do something about this. Honor compels us to do the right thing here. Ethics compels us to do the right thing here. And I informed the inspectors. Ultimately, it took a while, but ultimately the FBI public integrity section made a case on my boss. He ended up going to federal prison for 37 months for falsifying reports in federal criminal investigations. One of the other guys who was in that conference room went to jail for a year. One of the other guys got terminated, and a half dozen guys in my office who were also caught up in this ended up getting scattered to different offices around the country because the U.S. Attorney's Office there said, we're not going to work with any of those guys because they've got essentially giglio issues at that point. So, within about a year of coming on board as a special agent, I put my own boss in
Wow.
I put my own boss in the gun sights of the Department of Justice, and he ended up going to federal prison for 37 months. So that had some downstream impact on my career.
Well, that kind of reinforces the integrity that's inside the federal justice system right now. Because right now, if you look at in society, the Department of Justice, the federal Department of Justice, has not got a really good name. And something I've always said, that comes from the top, because that's where the corruption seems to be. Your field agents, and I was fortunate in my career to work alongside several FBI agents, U.S. Marshals. Your field agents there's some good guys, good men and women with a lot of integrity, a lot of honor, that would do that same thing. And that should reinforce to the people that, maybe the ones that are listening to us, that you do have some really good federal law enforcement agents out there that are trying to do the right thing in their job.
Yeah. It's the career bureaucrats that is where the corruption stems from, because you've got bureaucrats there who are steering policy no matter what party is in the White House or controls Congress, so either the House or the Senate. And these bureaucrats and some agencies even make up their own rules. I mean, they're not laws; they don't have to be passed by Congress, but they're making up their own rules, which leads to malicious prosecution and some rules of law that do not need to exist, and corruption.
It's crazy. We were in an office where we had to be the most above board people that you could be, because our job was literally to arrest dirty Border Patrol agents, dirty customs officers, dirty HSI agents, to hold them accountable. So we had to have the highest standard of conduct. And I don't think, looking back on it, I don't think my boss ever considered what he was doing to be a criminal thing. I think it was just a COIA thing, because he was nervous about getting in trouble. And, so in order to avoid an administrative tongue lashing, he created a criminal conspiracy. I don't think he necessarily saw it that way or realized. I don't think he intended for any of these cases to move forward in a way that was going to jeopardize people's careers and lives. He was just trying to put a Band-Aid over the situation that he had created
protecting his
with
job,
poor
management.
management.
Yeah. Well, he was jeopardizing the integrity of the office, the integrity of the agency, and the integrity of his agents also.
Absolutely. And that was my biggest, and what I was working at the time, I was attached to a DEA task force. I was attached to a HIDA group where I was sitting in on wires and dealing with things that involved our employees, our guys who were coming in, who were popping up on DEA wires because they were helping the cartels. So it put a dark mark on my ability to work, because as this kind of came up in the news, as the fact that our office is being investigated, and it's a major scandal when any federal office is being investigated by public integrity section, but the fact that it was an internal affairs office made that story even juicier, because these are the guys who are supposed to be held to a higher standard. Mm-hmm. And so the media storm around it tarred all of us, even those of us who had nothing to do with it, or who were whistleblowers, or who were doing the right thing, got kind of cast in that same light. And so for me, walking into that DEA office after this broke in the news, I had to sit down with a bunch of guys and say, listen, I blew the whistle on this, which put me in a tough spot, because then you worry about, are there guys around here who are going to look down on you for doing that, because of that blue wall, that sense of omerta that a lot of police mm-hmm. have. And so, there was a lot of thorny issues, but it came down to, for me, I was not in the military. I'm not an Army guy, but I called my dad after I was driving home, after I saw what I saw. And I said, my dad's been in human resources for, he spent his career in HR. He's hired and fired, thousands of people. And I thought, if anybody is going to help me kind of navigate these waters, both from an employment position and from a moral and ethical position, it's my father. So I called him. I said, what would you do? And he said, listen, West Point famously has one of the easiest codes of conduct to remember, and one of the oldest codes of conduct that says, I will not lie, I will not cheat, I will not steal, nor will I tolerate those who do. Mm-hmm. And he said, essentially, if you are willing to allow this to happen, if you're willing to see this happen, allow it to happen, then you are saying that it's okay. And what you accept becomes acceptable. And if it's acceptable to you, then by all means say nothing. But I don't think it's acceptable to you, is it? And it kind of put it on me that what I was already feeling, I had this fear that, what the blowback was going to be, what's going to happen to my career. But that really clarified things for me. It was like, what's going to happen to me doesn't matter. What matters is the integrity of the system. And what matters is what I'm upholding. What matters is that I took an oath to protect and defend this nation, the same oath that everyone else takes. And that I have to stand on that oath, even if it means difficulty in my career. I have to stand on that oath. And fortunately for me, things worked out fine. I worked through it, but it was an uncomfortable full 3 years as that happened. And one thing I'll tell you, life comes full circle. The folks who were working for Public Integrity Section at the time are names that you guys have probably heard of at this point. Almost 15 years later. At the time, the guy who was running that particular DOJ unit was a guy named Jack Smith. Mm-hmm. You may have heard that name once or twice in the news recently.
Yeah.
Several of the attorneys who prosecuted my boss went on to prosecute Steve Bannon, went on to we're part of the team prosecuting the former president right now. And one of those guys actually became a district court judge in Washington, D.C., whose name has been in the news quite a bit on issues involving January 6th and stuff like that. And he was actually appointed to a district court judge in the D.C. circuit by President Trump. So it's funny to me, looking back 15 years ago, that I met Jack Smith. I wouldn't say I knew him. I had to testify in grand jury in Washington, D.C. And so when I was up there as a witness, he popped his head into the conference room and introduced himself. And what was the funniest thing about it, looking back on it, it's not funny, it's tragic. But in the course of this investigation, one of my colleagues who was not involved at all in the conspiracy got indicted by Jack Smith's team. And so we talk about, in the current context, how they're kind of overly aggressive in what they're doing with the president and political opponents. Well, his team indicted an innocent man, and it blew up in their face, and they ended up having the charges dismissed with prejudice. The judge lit them up. And so I saw firsthand that those guys are pretty aggressive prosecutors, and not necessarily in an ethical way as well. So I saw both sides of it. I saw my boss who went to jail, who absolutely deserved to, and then I saw them indict a guy who had no relationship to the case whatsoever. So
okay,
it's interesting.
I want to ask you a question. Actually, I want to ask two questions. So one of them has to do with what you were talking about. You guys were, we're on the topic of integrity inside the agencies. And first question is, you were tasked with Border Patrol, how prevalent was the presence of corrupt agents? And second, because you kind of opened the door, and maybe nobody wants me to go through this door, but what are your thoughts on how Jack Smith is going after our current president in that, if you want to get into that? Because former President Trump, because I have my thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I see. So to answer the first question first, at the time that I was working in the Rio Grande Valley, there was a lot going on. The Gulf Cartel was the primary cartel across the border from where I was, and they have more money than we do.
Which cartel?
Gulf.
The Gulf Cartel. Right. Yeah. They have more money than we do, and they manage all the plazas, what they call the plazas. So all of the illegal immigration, all of the narcotics coming across, all of the trafficking coming across Tamaulipas is done by them. And a lot of the Gulf Cartel members, what you've heard of the Zetas. The Zetas they were the security organization for the Gulf Cartel. They splintered, they moved off. Around the time that I was down there, the head of the Gulf Cartel got arrested and extradited to the United States. His name was OCL Cardenas Guillen. And he, in order to not spend the rest of his life in a Supermax facility up in Colorado, he started singing like a canary. And so I was very, very busy very early in my career, operating on information that we received from OCL Cardenas Guillen, telling us, hey, I paid money to that guy, I paid money to that guy, I paid money to that guy. So we had a ton of Border Patrol agents, a ton of Customs officers that we only knew about because he wanted to save his skin, and he managed to cooperate enough that he worked his sentence down to like 25 years or something like that, from basically life in prison. And so we were very busy. And a lot of what happened was, after 9/11, we had a mass hiring. After 9/11, they shut down hiring for about 2 years while they reorganized the government, while they stood up the Department of Homeland Security. After they stood up the Department of Homeland Security, they wanted to basically double the size of Border Patrol, increase the number of customs officers. For those who don't know, Border Patrol operates between the ports of entry. Customs operates at the ports of entry. So at the airports, at the seaports, at the land borders, that's Customs and Border Protection, CBP. Border Patrol, which is a branch of CBP, operates between those points. So we had both those agencies get a ton of resources, a ton of hiring, a ton of numbers. And in the midst of that, they cut down on some of the standards. And they also did away with a longstanding rule which said, if you were hired, if you grew up in Brownsville, Texas, your first duty station is going to be San Diego or El Paso. It's going to be far away, because the likelihood of corruption is far greater if you take a person from that community and set them in a position of power right there, because they know people on both sides of the border. They grew up there. They have cousins and friends who are on the other side of the law. They did away with that rule. So we found ourselves kind of in a perfect storm from an integrity place, where the Gulf Cartel saw opportunity to send a bunch of compromised people through the academy under these lowered standards, these lowered background checks, knowing that they were going to get hired in Brownsville and work in Brownsville, hired in Rio Grande City and work in Rio Grande City. So between 2008 and say 2011, 12, a lot of the chickens came home to roost, and it kind of corresponded with the Gulf Cartel civil war with OCL Cardigan going to jail, and I was very, very busy. I wouldn't say it's as prevalent. I don't know if it's as prevalent now. I haven't been on the border, and it's been about a decade since I moved off the border, but we're still making arrests. We were kind of in the, I guess, the golden age of corruption when I was down there.
Wow.
As to your other point, what I would say is my time dealing with public integrity section, I got a real taste of how aggressive those guys are. There was an easy case to make in my office. There's an easy case to make. But what had happened with public integrity section at the time, and what I think is happening right now with Jack Smith in particular, is his attitude was push boundaries. Indict things and push legal theories that haven't been tested before to make a name for yourself. So the people he staffed that office with were what I would call kind of blue flamers. They were guys who wanted to be, they wanted to be career guys. They wanted to have a name. And a lot of them have names now that you would know. And so he staffed up aggressive prosecutors, young, aggressive prosecutors that he sent out there and basically said, I don't care if cases get overturned on appeal. I don't care if the Supreme Court strikes them down. You go out there and push legal theory aggressively and go after people. And that's when Ted Stevens, the senator from Alaska, got indicted and got put in, ended up getting put in jail. Actually, he didn't go to jail. He died in a plane crash before he went to jail, but the Supreme Court fully overturned that unanimously. That was the same group of people that went over after Bob McDonnell and his wife. He was the governor of Virginia. So they made a lot of very aggressive cases that did get overturned. And I think his attitude, what I saw back then, 2010, 2011, and how he managed his team and how he went after some of these public integrity cases very aggressively and on the boundaries of what was acceptable legal precedent, I think that tracks with what we're seeing now. Just my opinion as somebody who's seen it from the inside.
Yeah, well, it's all about the headline and what, because most people, they know about the headline, they know about the arrest, they know about a trial, but they never hear it's going to be on second or third page news when it gets overturned by the Supreme Court or what other
that's true.
appellate court. So
Bingo. And that's exactly what happened. Again, Bob McDonnell, the governor of Virginia, you may recall, was kind of seen as a potential presidential candidate, and he ended up getting prosecuted. I think it was 2011, 2012, around that same time, and it completely decapped his career, and it was completely overturned, both his conviction and his wife. Same thing with Ted Stevens, again, a Republican senator. Ted Stevens being convicted essentially paved the way for, people don't remember this, but essentially paved the way for Obamacare to pass because he was not there to vote. So a lot of these political, these aggressive prosecutions against political actors had effects that we're still feeling today, even though the cases were eventually overturned. And so I see a lot of that. And again, knowing what I know, knowing that some of the guys who are on his team now are the same guys that I was dealing with when I was, watching them from the inside. I know how they operate, I know how they work, and I can see it with through that lens as I'm seeing what's happening in some of the cases he's prosecuting.
Yeah. Some of these people have political motivation to play the long game. I mean, they're looking ahead, not just for a prosecution, but to deter something else happening down the road.
Well,
also,
all of our conspiracy theorist listeners out there can sit there. I mean, call it what it is. It does look like weaponization of the Department of Justice. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that frustrated me a lot in the late stages of my career. Just that idea, and I saw this too. I worked under 4 different presidents within Department of Homeland Security, and you can see that pendulum swing from Bush to Obama, and then from Obama to Trump, and then from Trump to Biden. You can see just this political football that is immigration, that is our border, and it's very frustrating, deeply frustrating, as somebody who just wants to go down there and protect the American people from the evil. And there is evil, and there's great. I love Mexico. I love Central America. I've been all over the world. But specifically to Mexico and Central America, great people there. There's wonderful people there. There certainly are people who are coming to the United States seeking a better life for their family, which I can identify with and understand. I brought my children here from overseas. But for me to sit there and watch, the politicization of a national security issue like our security at our border is deeply frustrating when you're charged with upholding law that's been on the books since 1965, like the Immigration and Nationality Act, and a new administration comes in and says, don't enforce that. And you're just watching what you know to be mass numbers of criminals, because the Gulf cartel is sending them. The government of Venezuela is sending them. We're going to be dealing with this problem for years and years and years down the road because of someone's political ambition. That's very frustrating as a law enforcement officer, as I'm sure y'all can understand.
No doubt. Well, I mean, you had a really good career with the Department of Homeland Security. Spent over 15 years with them, but let's talk about your transition into the role where you're at now. What led to that transition into the empire that you built now with your social media and with your wife's business and those things?
Sure. So in 2021, summer 2021, my father-in-law, who was a cancer survivor, was diagnosed with, essentially he had gone through cancer, he had gone through chemotherapy, he had gotten a clean bill of health in 2015 after that scare, but it came back in 2021 very aggressively, and immediately it had spread. It had gotten to a point before the diagnosis that it was not going to be operable. We knew that we had a terminal diagnosis. It was a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. And what the doctors essentially told us was that you've got anywhere from a year to 36 months. On the high end with palliative care, with chemotherapy, you might be looking at anywhere from 3 to 5 years. But the reality was we were probably in closer to that year to 18 month window at that point. And at that point in my career, we had kind of hit not a friction point, but my wife, throughout my career, I had been the primary wage earner for the first basically 14 years of my career. And my wife had been building a business in the health and fitness industry. She was a financial advisor. She found a passion for fitness. She became a personal trainer, was coaching runners, coaching Ironman triathletes, and she slowly was building this business and brand while I was kind of providing the safety net. And in the course of 14 years, she created this incredible business with a bunch of people working under her and really turned it into something amazing. And so we had kind of hit a friction point where my job, taking me out to, I'm going to go run a search warrant at 6 a.m. in some bad neighborhood in Houston. And, and it was limiting the growth for her because I wasn't there and present with the kids and with the family as much because I was on the road so much. I was doing pretty high op tempo at the time. And so we were kind of having conversations about what would it look like for me to leave and come work for her. And that's when we got my father-in-law's cancer diagnosis. And it just kind of upped the timetable. It was that clarity that I needed, that, she's sacrificed for my career time and time again. She's moved for my career twice. She's uprooted her business for my career. She's been, balancing a job and staying at home with our kids and doing all of those things at the same time so that I could have my career. And it just felt like, sometimes God taps you on the shoulder and is like, hey, listen, you need to pay attention here. It just felt like it was the right time for me to step aside and be in a role that was supportive to my family so that she could have the time, the appropriate.
Uh-oh. Well, we're having some technical issues here.
Amount of time. So I stepped away and took kind of a support role in this. I kind of became the bookkeeper, the tax guy, all the stuff she didn't want to do in the business so that she could have that time with her family.
Yeah. Well, that's something to be said for that. I mean, it's I'm not going to lie, that would have been a hard ask for me if my wife would have asked me to step away from my law enforcement career. I'm not going to lie about that. Now, today, knowing things that I know now, it would not have been quite as much of a decision, but back in the day, you gonna ask me to step away from my career being a cop? I mean, that wouldn't have went over very well.
It doesn't go over well with many law enforcement officers. There's been a lot of law enforcement officers, their wives or their spouses have told them, hey, look, it's either the job or you. And I mean, I was in those positions and it's, hey, sorry, man, this is what I am.
Yeah.
That's a hard decision to make. So kudos to you on that.
I commend you for that.
Big time.
She never, put any sort of ultimatum out, or never. And I think we have a tendency to get defensive, right? Like that, like exactly you said, this is who I am, this is what I do. We wrap ourselves in that flag, and the badge matters and the identity matters. For me, there was a recognition there that that at some point, and if I had still been the primary wage earner, I'm sure I would not have left, because that would have been the ability to make sure that we were financially set was hyper important as well. But she had a thriving business, and it was kind of a Sophie's choice, if you will, of I can keep my job that has great benefits and that has great pay and that I'm proud of and that I love to do and I'm very good at, but it's going to take me away from the family in a time when she needs to be fully focused emotionally on what's going on with the family, what's going on with her father, and that every other ounce of energy she has to be poured into keeping this business running. And so, she never asked, she never put an ultimatum in front of me, but I saw it as opportunity to say, listen, this is where I need to serve. I've served my community, I've served my country. Right now I need to serve my family primarily.
Yeah, that was a great decision. And, you just, you got to look back at that as being God's will in your life at the time also. And just, look what you've done so far. And we're going to talk about, some more of that. But, what about you? You like to compete in Ironman, done some ultra marathons, stuff like that. You want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, that kind of was born out of that stress of putting my boss in jail. A lot of guys in a law enforcement career, that like sustained hypervigilance, and that there's a very heavy impact on us. And a lot of guys turn to unhealthy habits. A lot of guys turn to alcohol or substance abuse, and it's endemic. And in fact, I've read some statistics where PTSD or PTSI, however you want to put it, but in the military, it's something like 15% of veterans. In law enforcement, it's actually a higher percentage of law enforcement is dealing with PTSD. It's like 16, 17%. And so when you think of it in those terms, that can be caused by the kind of things you guys did as SWAT operators. That can be caused by the stress of the job on a day-to-day basis. That can be caused by dealing with victims and internalizing the things. Like I was dealing with, towards the end of my career, thousands of victims, elder abuse victims, when I was on the elder abuse task force, and hearing those stories and internalizing those things. And so for me, I needed healthy outlets to deal with some of the stress that I was feeling. And I had always run. I'd always kind of kept fit by running. I did half marathons and marathons. I started swimming on my lunch break. The community pool was right down the street from the HIDA task force. And the other guys would go out and they would go to the barbecue restaurant or whatever. And I knew that they had open lap swimming from like 12 to 1. I said, I'm just going to go and swim on my lunch break. And I started doing that. And I started realizing that, I've got the running down, I've got the swimming down. If I could get a bike, I might be able to start doing triathlon. And it just sort of evolved from that. It became an opportunity for me to, at the end of the day, settle my thoughts, get stuff out of my head, and get out on the road with no headphones, no anything, and just have that experience, that mindfulness, and really sort of put yourself in a position to sleep better at night when your head hit the pillow, because you got a lot of the things you were feeling, the emotions and the stress, out in a healthier manner than other people use. And that's really where it came from. So I ended up doing 6 Ironman triathlons. I've done several ultramarathons. Ultramarathon is anything over a full marathon. So the longest race I ever did was about 40 miles. But those are kind of moments in my life and that I look back on and say, I had some voluntary adversity that is a well that I can draw from now when I'm dealing with issues that are involuntary. When I deal with adversity on a day-to-day basis, I can look back at those experiences and say, you've dealt with harder things than this. You've got it in you. You've got the resilience and the mental focus to get through this because of those things that I did that were tremendously challenging from a physical standpoint.
No. Well, how did all that, being a federal law enforcement officer, your athletic pursuits, the change of helping your wife run her business during the time that her father was suffering from cancer, how did all that translate into a second career of writing 2 books now, and being a very successful podcaster? I mean, this guy's putting out content like every single day. I mean, sometimes we struggle to what we're going to do from week to week for our podcast. But I mean, Kristofor, and if you subscribe to Substack, I look at, I'm a subscriber on his Substack, and I read his stuff just about every day. And this content that he keeps coming up with, man, it's like, how do you do this? How are you this creative and come up with all this stuff? So tell us about, how did you transfer into your second career now as a writer and a podcaster? And tell us about, successes or struggles that you've had with either of these also.
For sure. Well, I look at it this way. If you're a criminal investigator, like I was, your job is really to tell a story.
Right.
That you're finding facts, and then those facts tell your story. And whether that story leads to a conviction or leads to, exoneration, that's all you're doing. You're a fact finder who's trying to tell a story. And when I was an archaeologist, I was just trying to tell a story. I was trying to find facts in the ground that were going to tell my story. Who was here before us? What were they doing? You're trying to complete a picture for people. When I was in college, I always enjoyed writing. I worked for my college newspaper. I was an editor at my college newspaper. It was kind of my creative outlet. And I didn't get to really engage in that, obviously, in my law enforcement career. I was writing a story for a jury or for a judge. But transitioning, one of the first things I said was I'd like to scratch a creative itch. I haven't been on social media really, because social media is intended as an investigative tool. When you're a special agent, you're not putting your life out there and sharing it. And so I saw what my wife was doing, and I said, listen, when things settle down around here, if I'm not in a law enforcement capacity, I'd like to share some of the wisdom that I got from my law enforcement career. And I'd like to tell some stories that maybe other people can identify with that could help them move their life forward in a healthy way. And so having those experiences, making large scale cases, putting my boss in jail, working on the border in a chaotic, hectic time, racing Ironman triathlons, ultra marathons, all of those things are a great well to draw from to tell stories. And what I found is a lot of response from other husbands, fathers, dads, guys who are in their middle age. I'm in my mid 40s, guys who are at a point in their lives where they are looking for some inspiration. And there's a lot of guys who came out of the global war on terror. There's, guys out there. I wouldn't put myself on the same page as guys like a David Goggins or a Jocko Willink or anything like that. But those guys came out of stressful backgrounds and stressful situations where they tell those stories. And I said, listen, there's voices out there that are telling stories that matter to people. And I have stories that might matter to people. So I just started putting words on the page. And for me, initially, I didn't really intend to write a book for anyone. I was writing it for myself. And just kind of through a series of strange events, I joined a mastermind group to kind of learn a little bit about entrepreneurship. In that mastermind group, one of the guys who was in that mastermind group had written a book and had worked with Adam to produce that book. I found out he had written a book. I said, man, I have a manuscript. I'm kind of interested. I don't know how to publish it. What do I do? He said, let me put you in touch with Adam. I reached out to Adam. We really hit it off right away with that shared background in law enforcement, our shared faith. It just sort of worked out well. And he produced my first book, and then has been an inspiration to me ever since, in helping me tell my story in an effective way, and getting in front of audiences and doing public speaking and getting in front of podcasts. I've seen what he's done and how much of a benefit it has been to the law enforcement community that I still love and cherish. And I said, I want to add to that. And so it hasn't been easy, obviously. Learning any new skill set isn't easy. Anytime you go and start a new job, you're low man on the totem pole. You got to figure it out. The way I look at it is, you have to do something so much that it would be unreasonable for you to fail at it. And if you do something until it would be unreasonable to fail, you're far more likely to have success. Too many people get into podcasting or writing or running a Substack, and they don't put the reps in. They expect that, I'm going to hit it big on social media after 2 or 3 posts, and then they stop. Yeah. And what I've come to learn is that it's like, as with anything, as with Ironman, as with making a big gnarly investigation, it's consistency over time equals success. The longer you can be consistent, and the more you post, and the more volume you get, and the more, and this is the other thing, the more you're putting content out there, the more data you're getting on where it's hitting, on what people want to see, and the more you can focus and change your attention to serve the audience that you're cultivating. And so too many people go out there and they think, I'm going to start a podcast, I'm just going to put an episode out, and it's going to get X number of downloads, and it's going to be this, that, the other thing. It's easy, right?
Right.
And it's not easy. Yeah. It's a skill. It's like anything else. You have to learn the skill, and then you have to get good at the skill, and you're only going to do that by getting the reps in. I mean, it's like riding a bike. It's like standing in the batter's box and staring down a pitcher. You got to keep going until it'll be unreasonable for you to fail, and that's just kind of how I approach life. So I don't know, and we'll see. I'm not as successful as I guess success is a metric. You know, you just kind of look at it as what is success. Well, success for me is I get to wake up every day and do stuff like this and be with my children and be more present for my family than I've ever been in my life and career. We get to go stay in Florida at our condo for 3 weeks if we want to. I can work here in Texas if I want to. That is success to me, is the freedom.
I'm thinking that sounds like pretty good success to me.
That's pretty good success, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not looking at it from a metrics of how much money is coming in or this, that, or the other thing. The metric is how present am I for my family, and how much do I look forward to getting up in the morning and jumping into this and doing what I do, and I look forward to it every single day.
Yeah, you can't measure time.
Is the metric of success.
You just can't measure time or happiness. You know.
You're kind of giving us a little seminar right now. A training seminar for what we're doing. We're trying to turn this into, give us a little bit of how long did it take before you started seeing?
Watch out, he'll be done put us on a clock or want to sign a contract or something.
How long? I mean, you're talking about, and I agree with you. You got to put the time in. We didn't jump in the tactical world and go, okay, we've been doing this for a day and now we're successful. Experts at it. It takes the time. You got to put the work in. You got to put the reps in. You got to train and keep going and pushing and pushing and pushing. How long did it take before you started to see some of the fruits of your success, I guess?
I tell people that I started public speaking, and that's probably the biggest metric for success that I have is getting paid as a speaker. So I started, because my podcast, I don't advertise, I don't generate. The podcast is essentially a loss leader. The podcast is essentially, I'm putting content out there that I hope draws in an audience, that I hope gets attention, so that I'm more desirable to come and speak to your group, to come and speak to your organization, right? That's what I'm trying to do. Everybody's got a different thing that they're trying to do. But to me, the best measure of economic success comes from people wanting me to come and speak to them and be part of their organization. So for me, I tell people, I started speaking when I was in law enforcement. I taught at the academy. I taught at FLETC, which is the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. I went and spoke at seminars. I spoke at the Texas Attorney General's Money Laundering Conference. I mean, if there was a conference that I could speak to about investigative issues, I did. I practiced and got those reps in. Well, I was still getting a salary with the federal government. And I looked at that as like a collateral duty, but something that might benefit me down the road in a professional capacity. And so I spoke probably for 8 years before I ever got paid to do so. When you consider my time in law enforcement and then my time afterwards, I've spoken for a lot of groups where, hey, if you'll pay for a hotel room or you'll give me a plane ticket, you pay for me to get there on Southwest, I'll go. Or like Andy was saying, I flew out to just help and just be present with Burke Swearingen's Blue Watch group, just to be there so that I'm meeting people, I'm handing out my business card, I'm talking to people, I'm getting to know people. And so you have to be willing to get your hands in the dirt and put the reps in, even if you're not getting paid. And it took me probably from the time I left law enforcement until the first time I got paid for a speaking event, almost 2 full years of putting in reps and going and doing the work and running a podcast 3 times a week, 4 times a week, and writing Substack articles that maybe no one ever saw. So, but then because of all that, because of that work, because of writing a book that allowed me to have an introduction to people to say, this is my life story. If you're interested in learning more, I do public speaking, I do X, Y, and Z. Because of investing in myself and investing that time in the process, eventually I got picked up by Team Never Quit Speakers Bureau. And now I get to go out and tell stories. I get to have my face listed on the same page as David Goggins and some of those guys who are represented by that Speakers Bureau. And I get to go out and talk to groups and tell stories and get paid for it. But it wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. People see the success. They see, oh wow, you're doing X, Y, and Z. What they don't see is the stuff you don't talk about on social media. The free stuff and the grind and the hustle and the showing up at conferences where you're not getting paid and going and shaking hands and meeting people. The stuff that I'm fairly uncomfortable with and really had to come to terms with and learn as a skill set. That's the stuff that I don't really talk about that much. But yeah, it takes some time. It takes some time and some luck. It takes a lot of luck too. You got to meet the right people and know the right people.
Right. It's a lot of hard work.
You know what I realize right now?
What?
I'm going to pick on Tom, but we hadn't had a disclaimer this entire episode yet.
Yeah.
We haven't needed it. You know, Chris is great. He's doing a great job.
Thomas
He's not
catches
saying anything that we need.
Thomas catches me and Andy a lot of times, and he's got to stop us and say, "Hey, I got to put a disclaimer out there." You know, so I give him a hard time about that.
Oh,
You know, this
About cursing or what?
no, just about the legal disclaimer.
yeah, no.
Yeah. But this podcast has really been a blessing to us. Eric called me back in, I guess, about October, and said, "Hey, the Lord's leading me to start this podcast, and I want you to jump on as a co-host." And I had been praying for multiple opportunities, to go out and deliver the message that I had, and God had given me a couple different opportunities. And then Eric calls for this and says, "Hey, jump in here." And so it's been a tremendous blessing to come in and be able to do a podcast and to have a platform to put out the content that you want to put out, and that's the great thing about having your own podcast is you control the content, you control the message there. It's not the mainstream media, so it's not being directed by anyone else, right. And you're basically appealing to an audience that is receptive. Also, of course, we've had a few negative comments on some stuff that we've done, but
I like those though.
I'm like a duck,
I like those a lot.
Oh yeah, it's just going to keep on moving.
We haven't been canceled yet.
No.
Something. Go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is just if you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, and who isn't Gary V, what he'll tell you is, and I can confirm this because my mother-in-law was in advertising and marketing for 30 years, and she sold television ads in the Rio Grande Valley, so very small market, right? You're going around to small business people and you're like, hey, we're going to film this ad, and you film the ad and they pay for it, and they're going to pay per times that it's seen. But what you don't get with television advertising is you don't get to focus on who the audience is. You're going to focus on, this is going to run during Wheel of Fortune. You have a general sense of who's watching Wheel of Fortune, but you don't know if that's your target demographic. If you put out a podcast, if you put out a Substack, if you put out an Instagram, if you put out, there's so many different ways for free for you to share your message, whether it's as a small business owner or whether it's as a potential speaker, as an author, as a podcaster. There's so many different ways for you to share your message and do it at volume that costs you nothing. That we live in an era where it's a marketer's dream. Back then when my mother-in-law was, charging someone however much money to produce a commercial, there's no guarantee of success. Well, there's no guarantee of success now either, but you can be much more focused and much more targeted with your messaging, and you've got so many different platforms to spread it on, from YouTube to Instagram to whatever else. And like you said, you get to focus the message on what you want to talk about, and you get to talk directly to people without it being filtered. And so, know who you are, be as authentic as you can be, and know who you're speaking to, and then provide content that speaks to those people and do it at volume, and you will outlast others and be successful. That's just how it is.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing through all of this is there's just no shortcut. And that's the thing. I think the culture we live in today, everybody's looking for a shortcut because they see the instant everything.
It's
everything's
society.
Instant.
I Google everything and it comes up. It's immediate.
Right. It's what we want. We want to have success now. We want to have money now. We want to have all the things now, whatever that means. But the reality is, and it's always going to be the reality, and it has always been the reality, that there's no shortcut to anything that's worth having. And there's no shortcut to anything that's worth anything. It all takes time, it all takes effort, and it all takes consistency. And I love what you said, consistency over time equals success. And that's with anything. Your family, your job, your podcast, your faith, your whatever. Consistency over time equals success.
Yeah. And the marketing now,
that's a t-shirt, by the way.
Most of the marketing that's available now through social media, it's all free. There's so many free avenues to market yourself or to market your business out there now through social media.
Yeah, there's opportunities, and you have to be, and again, Gary, I'm going to steal what Gary V says, but I truly believe it as well. It's, do this. Spend 2 to 3 months putting out posts every single day, 2 times a day, 3 times a day, and try different ways to put the posts out. Try different ways. Try, if it's Instagram, try Reels, try regular posts, try stories, but put stuff out every day consistently. And if it's something you're passionate about, if it's something that you love to talk about, it shouldn't be hard to come up with content. It shouldn't be like, I got to sit here and figure out a skit to do and all this stuff. Just post, put stuff out. And at the end of about, say, 100 days of doing that, look at the data, look at the analytics. How many followers did I gain? What was the most impactful? What did people respond to the best? And then go back with your new skill set of understanding, the job of social media. It is a job. It's not something you just do periodically and you're gonna experience growth, but something you do consistently every day. Now that you have the consistency part down, now go back and recreate the most successful parts of that journey at volume, right? And so just doing that, I think, is what a lot of people don't see. A lot of people see the 20-year-old, with the good body at the gym who does one TikTok video and has 2 million followers. Now all these brands want to work with her. You assume that that's how social media works. And what that is the equivalent of the person who was born into a wealthy family. It's rare, right? Most people who are successful, whether it's in a traditional industry, whether it's in law enforcement, whether it's in anything, whether it's in entrepreneurship, whether it's in social media, are successful because, again, the volume and the consistency over time, and that really is all there is to it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your book that you've just got out. Is it actually been delivered yet, or is it just available for pre-order on Amazon now?
So I've got my copy of it.
Right.
You can get it on Amazon. Depending on when this episode airs, if you pre-order it on Amazon, it will be delivered by June 18th. The official release date is June 18th for the print copy. But as often happens with Amazon, if they've got them in stock, they'll release them
real quick
on pre-order. So. Yeah.
So 24 East Church Street, you can send copies to me, Thomas, and Andy at that address, 24 East Church Street in Headland, Alabama, 36345. Anyway, go ahead.
I can send you, I don't have copies in hand, but what I can send you right now is the Kindle version. I do have that that you can download. So I can get you a head start on it. Okay. The Kindle version is available now. And the Nook version is available now online. And then I've got access to that, so I can send you all a few copies of that right now. But the book itself, the print version, which I prefer, and we kind of talked about this earlier. I'm not like a conspiracy theorist, but I don't like the fact that there's like 3 or 4 companies that control all of digital media. It bothers me. I want to hold something in my hands that Amazon or Google can't take away from me. So for me, I've gone back to buying CDs. I've gone back to buying physical copies of books because I'm just uncomfortable with having everything in the digital format. But there's just something about holding a book that I like.
Yeah. Well, this book, In Valor, is 365 days of Stoic meditations for first responders. Let's talk a minute about what the Stoics were, what Stoicism is. A lot of people may not be familiar with that. Over the last probably 3 or 4 years, I've really got into a lot of the Stoicism. And I tell you what, it's really, the Stoics themselves were not really known as being believers in the one and true God. But the advice, the philosophy that they had, the advice that they gave really lines up with a lot of the things that we should be doing if we are followers of Christ also. So just talk about Stoicism just a minute and talk about some of your, give us maybe a couple of your favorite passages in the book.
Sure. So the school of Stoicism is a school of philosophy that was founded in the Hellenistic period. So if you follow the classics at all, the Hellenistic period is that time in Greek history after the death of Alexander the Great, right? So it's like 300 years before the birth of Christ. That period of kind of upheaval in the classical world where the Greeks are kind of losing control and the Roman Empire the Roman Republic and then later the Roman Empire kind of entering the world stage. And so this is a period of a lot of upheaval in the classical world. And the school of philosophy of Stoicism was founded by a guy named Zeno, and he was a merchant who traded goods on the Mediterranean Sea between the various Greek city-states. He experiences a shipwreck. He ends up in Athens, and he wanders into a bookstore in Athens, and he sees a philosopher there speaking. And he starts listening to these different philosophers who are emerging in this Hellenistic period. I like to think of it like there's that period in the 19th century after, say the 1840s onward, where all of these different denominations of Christianity took root in the United States. You're talking about like a lot of like just transcendental thought and all this stuff happening. It's a very similar time period, right? Except it's a philosophical sort of awakening in the ancient world at this time. And he's listing all these philosophers, and he starts kind of putting together the bits and pieces of those philosophies into his own school of thought, which becomes known as Stoicism. And Stoicism essentially is a school of philosophy that says we need to focus on what we can control. Now, probably the most famous Stoic philosopher comes around about 400 years later, Marcus Aurelius. He was the emperor of Rome. He was raised on the Stoic tradition, and he essentially says, I'm going to try this at scale. I'm going to try to be the first kind of philosopher king, as it were. So when you say that they weren't known for being Christians, they weren't, because the school predates Christianity by several hundred years. But what's interesting is one of the most famous philosophers of the school of Stoicism, a guy named Seneca the Younger, he was born the same year as Christ, and their lives kind of tracked. And so you see in his writings an acknowledgement and a knowledge of Christianity that he talks a lot about the same things because he was aware of Jesus. He was aware of this movement that was occurring. And so you see a lot of common ground, a lot of commonality between Christ and Seneca at this time. And so there is a lot in Thomas Aquinas' writing and other Christian theologians that tracks very closely, because the ethics and the morality in Stoicism, though it doesn't have a deity, there isn't a religious context to it, there is an ethical context to it, a context around virtues, around those cardinal virtues of justice and wisdom and temperance and courage that any Christian will identify with and recognize. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because there's 800,000 cops in the United States, and not all of them are Christians, not all of them are believers, not all of them are followers of another faith tradition, but all of them need some grounding in morality and ethics. And what a lot of theologians will tell you is, among all of the schools of philosophy, the one that gets closest to Christianity in terms of the message that it shares is Stoicism. And so I figured if I can be, an advocate for my faith, when I'm talking to people in person, I'm not shy about being a Christian and about my faith. But if I can share some of those same principles and that same wisdom with individuals, that maybe leads them closer to a relationship with God through a different means.
Parallel.
Absolutely. It's an opportunity to do that. It's an opportunity to give people an ethical foundation that maybe is the first step on the path towards having a relationship with Christ. So, there is a lot of overlap there, and it might be a little bit more easy to digest for folks who have a standoffish attitude about a faith relationship. And so I hope that it helps a lot of cops. I hope it gives them a way to have some mindfulness, to consider things like self-discipline, consider things like temperance, consider things like having a high moral standard, consider things like an ethical foundation and how they operate both on and off duty.
Will this book speak to people that aren't cops as well? Like, could somebody that hasn't ever been in law enforcement pick this book up and use it as well, and it'd be relevant to them?
Absolutely. So there's a author that a lot of folks are probably familiar with named Ryan Holiday, who's kind of popularized Stoicism in a modern context. There's other guys out there, but he's probably the most famous. He's written a number of books, and one book that he's written is called I have it on my shelf. It's called The Daily Stoic, and it's very similar to this in that it's a daily Stoic meditation. Now, I wanted to write a book that was specific for first responders, and so a lot of the experiences that I share in there have to do with leadership. It has to do with stories that we'll be familiar with to police. I talk about Graham versus Connor. I talk about things that use of force incidents, famous incidents involving law enforcement and ethics and morality. But if you are just looking for daily wisdom and daily advice and a little bit of inspiration to go about your day, you're going to find a ton of stuff in there that is valuable and useful to you. It's kind of, I look at it the same way as like a Jocko Willink book might be rooted in the lessons that he learned in the Navy SEALs, but those lessons are applicable to other people as well.
You just want to sell one to every cop in the country, right?
I'd love to. Yeah. I'd love to sell more than one.
800,000. I mean, you'd be satisfied with that, probably, right?
I'd be satisfied with getting this in front of as many people as I can. I'm painfully aware that people don't necessarily buy books these days that especially when you're self-publishing something. So it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of grinding to get this in front of people and get in front of audiences, which is why I started the podcast or rebranded the podcast to talk more about Stoicism, to speak more directly to that. That's why I rebranded the YouTube. I put everything into this basket with the idea of really turning people on in the law enforcement community to the value of practicing this philosophy on a daily basis, the value of having some emotional control, the value of recognizing, understanding what you control, what you do not, and focusing on the things that are within your control so that you can have better career longevity, better resilience, and the importance of creating that voluntary adversity in your life, because that adversity, that's what polishes the diamond. Mm-hmm. And I'm borrowing from a Stoic quote when I say that, but a diamond does not become a diamond without friction. And Seneca said that. And so think of your life as an opportunity to polish that stone and polish that diamond. And adversity is the friction you apply to that rough stone. And so I look at this as an opportunity to speak to as many people as possible. And however many people pick it up, however many people listen to the podcast, I don't care how they digest the information. I just want it to create better cops, create better first responders, create people who have better emotional control, create people who recognize and understand that time is valuable, that life is short, and that we waste so much of it, and we can do so much more with our lives if we lean in. And so that's really the point of it. But yeah, if 100,000 copies move off the shelves, that'd be great too.
What about your favorite passage in the book, or maybe who is your favorite Stoic?
I mean, I'm probably not unique in this regard, but I love Marcus Aurelius. I love it because he was he's the most powerful man in the known world at the time. He's living in the 1st and 2nd century AD, right? And so he's you can learn contemporaneously about Marcus Aurelius from the early Christian theologians as well. And he was there was a fair amount, obviously, of persecution of the Christians by the Romans, but Marcus Aurelius was probably the first emperor who had a much different attitude towards the Christians, towards their faith tradition, and essentially was saying don't persecute them. I'm not saying he was a saint or anything, but like he was saying don't persecute them. But he, to me, is interesting because he wrote a journal that we know of now as Meditations. It's one of the most famous books you're going to find, and this is a journal that he wrote to himself. He didn't intend for this to ever be released for publication. And he wrote like 12 volumes of this during his 18-year reign as the emperor of Rome. And he was dealing with things like a war against the Parthian Empire, a war against the Germanic tribes, the Antonine Plague, which was a smallpox plague that killed 7.5 million Romans. He was dealing with these incredibly challenging things. And every day he's writing in his journal and reminding himself every single day to be a moral man, to be a good man, to not be colored by the purple, as he says, because purple was the color of the emperors, the kings, right? Don't be colored by the purple. Don't allow your thoughts to dye the color of your soul purple. Allow yourself to be a good man first, that you first do the right thing is all that matters. And that foundation in his journal, knowing that this wasn't intended for him to show off, it was intended to remind himself, the most powerful man on earth at the time, to be a good man, to do the right thing, to stand firm on principle and on ethics and on morality. And I don't know, if you can't pick that book up and get something from it, if you can't take that as a leader, as a sheriff, as a police captain, if you can't pick up that book and get something from it, I don't know what to tell you. But to me, it's as impactful as any book written by a common man could be. It's in it. There's so much wisdom. And so I love it. And one of my favorite lines from that book that I would share is essentially he's comparing life to being like a fire, right? A fire consumes everything that's thrown into it. And what he's essentially saying is that the fire can consume you. It can burn you down, or it can bring growth. It can bring warmth and light by consuming what's thrown into it, right? So there's two sides to the coin. So you can look at adversity that way. Adversity can burn you down, can tear you down. How many cops out there have dealt with adversity, have been, in the throes of addiction or alcoholism, or just hate their job, they hate their lives, they're angry about everything. It ruins their relationships, it ruins their family. And they let that adversity burn them down, versus how much better could you be if you allowed that adversity to polish that stone, to bring warmth and brightness to everything it touches? You living a life of integrity through adversity lights up other people's lives, right? And so he's encouraging us to look at life as opportunity and obstacles. And to me, that's just a wonderful message that transcends any faith tradition, that transcends any any theology. It's just a great base human instinct to don't let life get you down. Make of it what you can.
No. Man, it sounds like a great book. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy of it and read it. I've followed you on social media, and I've seen some of the excerpts that you've put out there, and the struggles you talked about writing this book. And I think this book's probably got a twofold purpose: is it can mold others, but I think it molded you also during the process.
Yeah, absolutely. The greatest thing about writing it was the advice I got to give myself as I did so. and it's right. When you write a daily devotional, you're writing 365 individual chapters.
Right.
And you're writing a chapter for every day of the year. That's the intention. And since I've had the first edition, the first print copy in my hand, I've been reading it every day. Right. And the way it's structured is it gives a quote from one of the Stoics, and it's not always the ancient Stoics. I bring in quotes from modern day Stoics, guys like the Jocko Willinks and the David Goggins, who maybe aren't philosophers, but live the philosophy in a very real way. Guys like Dan Crenshaw, guys like Marcus Luttrell, guys who live this philosophy in a very real way today. And I encourage people to read what they write and listen to what they say as well. But I'll put one of those quotes in there, and then I'll contextualize it in 2 or 3 paragraphs and give it a modern spin, a modern context. And then I leave people with a journal prompt or an action item that allows them to integrate it. So they can read that. They can say, okay, I get what Seneca is saying. I get what Marcus Aurelius is saying. And then I give them a journal prompt that says, now go integrate it. Now go ask yourself these questions. Really look within. And I think that if you do those exercises, it takes you 4 or 5 minutes a day, but you do those exercises, that's how you practice a philosophy. And this philosophy, unlike, the kind of beard stroking teacher's lounge sort of philosophies, they're very academic and scholastic. This is truly a philosophy meant to be practiced. And if you don't practice it every day, just like we talked about with social media, just like anything else, if you don't practice something every day, if you don't practice your faith every day, if you don't pray every day, you lose the edge. And so, that's the intention of the book.
Yeah. And it's not something that is so deep that you have to be a PhD to understand either. I mean, this Stoic philosophy is something that just anybody, any common man or woman can understand.
That's one of my favorite things about Stoicism is that Zeno was the founder of the school, was a merchant. The guy who followed him, Cleanthes, was a water carrier. And a water carrier in the ancient world was literally a guy who carried water from the aqueduct or the river for people. Some of them were Epictetus, one of the famous Roman Stoics, was a slave. He was a slave for 30 years and he earned his freedom and was released and became a philosopher. Marcus Aurelius, though, was an emperor. Seneca was a playwright and an advisor to Nero. So it spans all of these stations in life. You could be the emperor of Rome, or you could be a slave, and you could still find benefit from practicing this philosophy.
Right. So we're kind of getting close on our time, but I've saved the best topic for last, and I think what we're going to bring up last is probably your greatest achievement. And this story has a special place in my heart too. I was adopted. You've heard me tell my story before when I spoke. But you and your wife adopted two daughters, and tell us the special circumstances surrounding the adoption of your 2 girls.
Yeah, we had been married for some time, and we had known that it was going to be probably a challenge for us to start a family biologically. And so adoption had always kind of been on our hearts, and it had always been something that we felt had been placed in our way by God. And we knew when we started looking that we were just going to know. We were going to know. And my youngest daughter, we adopted out of birth order, but we decided to go with the China program, international adoption, just knowing that it was a certainty. We didn't want to go through what so many people in our church had gone through with the foster to adopt program, because foster programs are typically designed for family reunification. And we wanted to make sure that we were building a family and not putting ourselves in a position where we had to go through that heartbreak of saying goodbye, which I know, a lot of people have the strength to do. We just didn't feel like we had that strength. So we started that adoption process, and immediately we were looking at children who had unique special needs. And what we thought we were adopting with my youngest daughter in 2017, we had been told she was deaf and she was epileptic. She was obviously very far behind. She was living in a very impoverished part of China. She had global delays. And so we knew we were going to be dealing with some struggles. But she was neither deaf nor epileptic, which she actually would come to find out after coming home and going through neurological testing and all of that, was that she presents on the autism spectrum. And she's got a unique chromosome deletion syndrome that presents as autism. And she's nonverbal. She doesn't speak. She's really got very limited self-care abilities, but is just the absolute light of our lives. And so we became parents and immediately were challenged by it. And what I came to learn was that all of the adversity that I faced in my life as a law enforcement officer, all of the adversity that I faced in my life in Ironman and ultramarathon really just prepared me for parenting in a very real way. It prepared me to face the adversity of being a dad to a special needs child. And so there's a reason God placed her in our hands, because we had the resilience and the perseverance that was inborn from our hobbies, from our sports, from our careers, that really allowed us to be the parent that she needed us to be. And she's been our driving force. She's been the driving force behind the growth of my wife's business. She's been the driving force behind, me leaving my career, behind the growth of my post-career work as a speaker, as a podcaster, as an author. Anything that I can do that allows me to spend more time with her and to be more present for her is what I will do. And then we went back in 2019 to adopt my second daughter. We decided at that time, because we said, listen, we didn't think that we could deal with a child with physical handicaps. We were worried about that during our first adoption. We were concerned about a child that couldn't walk or anything like that. After we'd been parents for 2 years of a child with special needs, we're like, let's go. We got it. So we went back. We found my second daughter again, and this was, there's a longer story here, but we had two kind of failed adoptions along the way where a child got adopted that we had kind of hoped that we could get to, but we didn't get into the process quick enough. And then another child that we started to connect with and thought we were going to be able to adopt, they ended up withdrawing her from the program. And so, these doors kept closing on us, and our family members were saying, like, listen, like, give it some time. Don't rush back into this. You've had a couple of heartbreaks. Let's not rush back into this. We just felt completely differently. We felt called. And this is in early 2019. We said, no, we need to bring this little girl home. We need to get to her. We need to get to her. We need to get to her. So we worked our tails off. It took about 8 months, start to finish, to get to her, which is very quick for an international adoption. But I mean, if there was paperwork that needed to be sent in, we were sending it FedEx overnight. We were doing everything that we could to get to her as quickly as possible. We ended up getting to her in October of 2019. We went to China. We brought my daughter home. She has cerebral palsy. She's non-ambulatory, although she's had several major surgeries and now is beginning the process of walking at age 11, which is incredible. But we got home day before Halloween, and we came home with this weird sort of upper respiratory thing that we couldn't quite put our finger on. Everybody came home a little bit sick. Everybody came home with flu-like symptoms. And then, of course, a couple months later, we came to find out what exactly was going on and why so many people on our plane that we came back on were hacking and coughing and sick. And the China adoption program shut down when the pandemic started, and it hasn't reopened. So if we hadn't have listened to God, if we hadn't have worked so hard to get to her, we couldn't understand why we felt that calling that we needed to, but we didn't question it. We just did. We just acted. And the fact that we got to her when we did is entirely based on us putting our faith in God's plans for us and following them and getting to her as quickly as we did, and getting her home is the whole reason she has a family now. And she's been with us. She's now 11 years old. She's been with us since 2019. As I said, she's had two major surgeries that have allowed her to become ambulatory, have allowed her to walk. Brightest, smartest little girl you've ever met. She's learning Spanish now. She's just like incredible. And so we built our family through adoption, through international adoption. I know so many people. We worked with Lifeline Children's Services right there in Alabama. So we did both our adoptions. We're faith-based, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's been the most challenging and most impactful thing that I've ever done in my life, beyond anything I did in law enforcement, beyond anything I could ever do as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, man, what a great story. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you related to me that the reason that you and your wife wanted to adopt these girls who had physical disabilities was because you knew that in China, these young ladies with physical disabilities would just kind of be thrown into a corner in an orphanage somewhere and never really have the life that they deserve to live.
Very, very much so. And I think there's Yeah, there's the misconception about the Chinese program is that it's the one child policy and that all of that. So that stuff's gone by the wayside. What they do have there is a very compartmentalized society where if you were a child, they try to adopt you internally within China first before you're released for international adoption. And so the only kids who really make it to the international adoption are children who have disabilities. Not all. That wasn't the case 15, 20 years ago necessarily, when one child policy was in effect and a healthy baby girl was, like most people who adopted healthy baby girls. Mostly you're going to be adopting children who have a severe disability, a physical disability, a mental health condition, mental retardation, oftentimes Down syndrome, autism, things of those nature. And you walk into that with eyes wide open, knowing that if you or people like you are not willing to do this, are not willing to follow was Isaiah 117. I mean, you need to go out and take care of orphans and widows. Like, that is your calling. If you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to walk into that with eyes wide open, that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to be forgotten in a society that doesn't care about them or give the resources to them to live happy and healthy lives. And so I wish we could bring more home. I really wish we had the resources to do so. But if you don't have the resources to adopt, if you're listening to this and it's on your heart, but you don't have the resources to do it, help people who do. Help people who are in that process. Donate. Do what you can to help other people bring children home, because without folks stepping up and doing this, again, those children will not have the lives that they could enjoy here. And I'm grateful every day that my children are here and that they have a full life ahead of them where they can choose whatever path they want, go in any direction that they want. And I'll forever be grateful to have been called in that direction.
Yeah. And what a great story. And you and your wife both are to be commended for taking on that challenge, because a lot of people truthfully just would not have ever taken on that challenge. First of all, adopting internationally, and second of all, adopting children who had physical or mental disabilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's most of the people that I was over there, and I don't want to put all the credit on this, but most of the people that we met, and we met a lot of American families there, because you spend your first week in province meeting your child, and then your second week you're in Guangzhou with all the other American families, and you're going through the consular process on the U.S. side of things before you come home. Almost all those families that we spent time with, almost all of them were from the South. And almost all of them were Baptists. And we're like, oh, all right, like us. All right. So we're saving the world, guys.
Good stuff.
Hey, before we jump off today, Kristofor, we just want to give you a chance to put out all of your connections, your social media connections, your website, all those things where people can connect with you and see what you're all about, listen to you, read your material, and hopefully order some of your books.
Yeah, the easiest way to find me is on my website, KristoforHealey.com. And of course, my parents gave me a very strange spelling, but that's Kristofor with a K, Kristofor, and then Healey, Healey. You can get links to everything on there, all my social media, all my Substack, my newsletter. It's all right there. But otherwise, if you just look up Kristofor Healey on Amazon, you'll find my books. If you look me up online, you'll probably find my website. And come check me out. And if I can serve you in any way, if I can give you advice in any way, if I can speak to your organization or help you in any way, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, you also got a big presence on LinkedIn and Instagram, especially also.
Yeah.
Too. So, but Kristofor, it's been a pleasure to have you on today. You guys got anything else for Kristofor?
I don't, man.
I told you this was going to be a dynamic episode.
Yeah, it was. I still want to give you kudos, man, for standing up the way you did throughout your career. That was outstanding. I
appreciate that.
Says a lot about you.
Well,
we didn't even talk about elder scams. We'll get to that some other time.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a whole issue in and of itself.
Yeah, we could do an episode. Maybe we can do an episode one day to help people, to where they don't get scammed. I've had some friends of mine; their parents have been scammed and went to the bank and sent somebody $5,000. And as soon as it hits one account in the U.S., it's gone. It's gone from that account over to
I know
Kenya
people.
or wherever the case may be.
That'd be a great episode.
I speak to a lot of church groups about that in particular, because of elderly folks and the folks that are the average age of my victims when I was investigating those crimes was 73. And so, if you're listening to this and you have a church group, or you have, if you want me to speak to your group, if you have a grandparents conference, like my church has a grandparents conference every year, and I try to speak. If you can, you feel free to reach out to me, because I led the largest tele-fraud case in U.S. history, where we took down the people behind the IRS scam, and most of the victims of that were elderly folks. I'd be happy to talk to any group out there about scam prevention. Happy to.
No.
Well, that's good stuff.
Yeah, well, good deal. Well, Kristofor, brother, it's great to talk to you today. Kristofor and I, we stay in contact quite a bit and message each other back and forth and all. But I look forward to seeing you in October in Birmingham again for the Blue Watch Conference, and look forward to hearing you speak this year.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, guys, and God bless.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kristofor. Have a great day, brother.
You too.
Thank you.
That's pretty good, man.
Yeah.
I still think that we're still recording, so don't cut this one off. I want to still ask everybody.
My fault.
Make sure you're going to our YouTube. Make sure you're going to our Instagram. Make sure you're going to our Facebook. We need we need your support. We've been getting some comments in. We really like those. We want to start. We want to read every comment that you have. Give us the ideas that you want us to talk about, and just show the support for what we're doing.
Yeah.
We still have the merch. Go to the merch. Grab yourself a hat, grab yourself a shirt, and help us out that way.
Yeah.
Outside of that, is there anything that you guys got left?
Share this podcast with all your friends on your different social media platforms.
Absolutely.
So we enjoy doing this podcast. It's a blessing to us. Definitely, we're not here to make any money or gain fame or anything like that. And I think we're just we're doing what God wants us to do, and putting out the message that He wants us to put out. And we just want to be a willing and worthy vessel for God and His message.
Yeah. All right. Well,
absolutely.
Thomas, you want to close us out?
Sure. Yeah. God, I just pray that this talk will reach the right ears, the people that need to hear it, Father, that they'll be encouraged, they'll be blessed, and they'll be also pushed in order to be able to do what it is you've called them to do. Lord, we just pray for this podcast as it goes out, as people hear it, Father. We pray that it does glorify you, that we continue to just do it the way you want us to do it. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, guys. See ya.